Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars through the main viewing screen. His small fleet of 12 ships moved slowly through space, patrolling the trade routes between Earth and the outer colonies. It was peaceful work, exactly the kind of job the galaxy expected humans to do. For 300 years, ever since humans first met alien species, they had been known as the Quiet Ones. Other races saw them as good diplomats and traders, but not much else. The big military powers in the galaxy barely noticed Earth's tiny defense fleet. Morrison had heard all the jokes before. At the last Galactic Council meeting, a Zephyrian admiral had laughed and said humans were like house pets, useful for small tasks but not real fighters. The comment had stung, but Morrison just smiled and said nothing. That was what humans always did. They smiled, nodded, and kept their thoughts to themselves. The bridge door opened, and Captain Lisa Hayes walked in. She commanded the exploration, Ship Horizon, which was currently docked with Morrison's flagship for refueling. Hayes was young but smart, one of the best scout captains in the human fleet. "Admiral, we're picking up some strange readings from the Andromeda sector," Hayes said, handing him a datapad. "Looks like major fleet movements from all three powers." Morrison studied the information. The Zephyrian Empire, the Hive Collective, and the Luminary Federation were all moving ships toward the disputed mining systems. That was never a good sign. The Zephyrians were big, aggressive reptiles who loved to show off their massive warships. Their dreadnoughts were the size of small cities covered in weapons and armor. They had conquered dozens of worlds through pure military force. The Hive Collective was different but just as dangerous. They were insect-like creatures who thought as one mind. When they fought, they sent thousands of small ships that worked together like a swarm of bees. Individual ships were weak, but together they could overwhelm any enemy. The Luminary Federation was the most advanced of the three powers. They were beings made of pure energy who could manipulate matter at the quantum level. Their weapons could phase through any armor, and their ships could become invisible at will. All three powers had been arguing for months about mining rights in the Andromeda sector. The region was rich in rare metals that all three civilizations needed. Humans had tried to help negotiate a peaceful solution, but the three powers were not interested in talking. "Sir, there's more," Hayes said, pointing to another section of the report. "My intelligence sources say all three powers are mobilizing their full battle fleets. This isn't just a border dispute anymore. They're preparing for total war." Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. A war between these three powers would be devastating. Billions of innocent civilians lived in the systems around the disputed zone. If fighting broke out, entire planets could be destroyed. "Have you reported this to Earth Command?" Morrison asked. "Yes, sir. I sent the data 2 hours ago. President Amanda Foster has called an emergency session with the Global Defense Command." Morrison nodded. Foster was a good leader, but she was stuck in the same position as all human politicians. The galaxy saw Earth as a minor power, useful for trade and diplomacy, but not important enough to have a voice in major decisions. Over the next few days, the situation got worse. Both Morrison and Hayes received reports of massive military buildups. The Zephyrians were moving their entire first fleet toward the disputed systems. The Hive Collective had mobilized over 10,000 combat ships. The Luminary Federation was charging their quantum cannons and preparing their phase destroyers. Morrison requested permission to attend the emergency Galactic Council session, but his request was denied. The message from Council Speaker Veltar was short and insulting. "This matter concerns real military powers. Human input is not required." That night, Morrison sat in his private quarters looking at star charts and fleet reports. His communications officer knocked on the door and entered with a priority message from Earth. "Sir, this just came in from General Ryan Cooper at Earth Command," the officer said, handing him a secure datapad. Morrison read the message and frowned. Cooper had been trying to offer human assistance to all three powers, hoping to prevent the war. Every offer had been rejected. The Zephyrians called human ships toys. The Hive Collective said human weapons were primitive. The Luminary Federation dismissed human technology as centuries behind our capabilities. The message from Cooper included intelligence reports that made Morrison's blood run cold. All three powers were now moving toward full mobilization. Civilian populations were being evacuated from dozens of worlds. The neutral trading stations were preparing for refugees. Most disturbing of all was a report from Dr. Helen Davis, Earth's chief expert on alien species. She had been studying the three powers for decades, and her analysis was grim. She believed that once the fighting started, none of the three powers would be able to stop until one side was completely destroyed. "They've never fought a war like this before," Davis had written. "Each power believes they are superior to the others. None of them will accept defeat or negotiate once blood is spilled. This will be a war of extinction." Morrison put down the data pad and walked to his window. Outside, he could see the lights of his small fleet, 12 ships against the combined might of 3 galactic superpowers. It seemed hopeless, but as he watched his ships, Morrison remembered something his grandfather had told him years ago. The old man had been a soldier in the last Earth War, before humans joined the galactic community. "Jake," his grandfather had said, "the most dangerous enemy is the one who looks weak but isn't. People make mistakes when they think they know everything about you." Morrison had never fully understood what his grandfather meant. But now, as war clouds gathered across the galaxy, he was starting to get an idea. He activated his secure communications system and sent a message to Earth Command. It was time to have a serious conversation with President Foster and the Global Defense Command. The galaxy was about to tear itself apart, and maybe it was time for humanity to stop being the quiet species. Outside his window, the stars continued their eternal dance, unaware that everything was about to change. The three great powers were preparing for war, confident in their strength and dismissive of the small human fleet that watched from the edges of space. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. The war began on a Tuesday morning, Galactic Standard Time. Captain Lisa Hayes was on routine patrol near the Kepler trading station when her sensors detected the first shots being fired. 3 massive Zephyrian dreadnoughts opened fire on a Hive collective mining facility, and within minutes the entire sector erupted into chaos. Hayes watched in horror as the conflict spread like wildfire. The Luminary Federation immediately retaliated against both sides, claiming they were protecting their territorial interests. Soon, hundreds of ships were engaged in bitter combat across a dozen star systems. Back on Earth, President Amanda Foster held emergency meetings around the clock. The Global Defense Command headquarters buzzed with activity as reports poured in from across the galaxy. The three great powers were throwing everything they had at each other, with no regard for civilian casualties. General Ryan Cooper stood before the assembled leaders, his face grim as he delivered the latest intelligence reports. "The situation is worse than we predicted," he said. "All three powers have declared total war. They're not just fighting over the mining rights anymore. Each side now believes this is a fight for survival." Dr. Helen Davis had been right. Once the shooting started, none of the three powers could back down. Their pride and their very nature made compromise impossible. The Zephyrians saw retreat as cowardice. The Hive Collective could not understand individual surrender when the collective mind demanded victory. The Luminary Federation believed their advanced technology made them destined to rule the galaxy. Cooper tried again and again to offer human assistance. He sent messages to all three powers proposing peace negotiations on neutral Earth. The responses were swift and insulting. Admiral Kresh of the Zephyrian Empire replied first. "We do not need help from mammals who hide behind diplomacy, because they are too weak to fight." The Hive Queen's message was delivered through her translator drones. "Your primitive vessels would be destroyed in the first minutes of real combat. Stay in your safe systems and let true warriors handle this conflict." The Luminary High Council was even more dismissive. "Human technology is centuries behind ours. Your ships cannot even penetrate our basic shields. This war will be decided by powers you cannot comprehend." On the bridge of the horizon, Hayes received new orders from Admiral Morrison. She was to move closer to the combat zones and gather intelligence on all three fleets. It was dangerous work, but her ship was fast and had good stealth capabilities. As Hayes guided her ship through the outer edges of the battle zones. She saw the terrible cost of the war. Entire planets were being bombarded from orbit. Civilian ships fleeing the combat areas were sometimes caught in crossfire and destroyed. Refugee camps on neutral worlds were overflowing with millions of displaced beings. The worst incident came 3 weeks into the war. Hayes was monitoring communications from Kepler Station, one of the galaxy's most important neutral trading hubs. The station housed 50,000 civilians from dozens of different species, including 300 humans who worked at the diplomatic school there. The Zephyrians had been losing ground to a combined Hive and Luminary assault. Desperate to break the stalemate, Admiral Kresh made a fateful decision. He ordered his fleet to attack Kepler Station, claiming it was secretly supplying weapons to his enemies. Hayes watched in horror as Zephyrian dreadnoughts unleashed their full firepower on the defenseless station. The attack lasted only 20 minutes, but when it was over, Kepler Station was a burning wreck drifting in space. All 50,000 civilians were dead, including 37 human children from the diplomatic school. The news hit Earth like a physical blow. For 300 years, humans had maintained their peaceful reputation by staying out of galactic conflicts. They had never lost civilians to alien aggression before. The images of the destroyed station and the names of the dead children were broadcast on every human world. President Foster called an emergency session of the Global Council. For the first time in centuries, the meeting was classified at the highest security level. Even most government officials were not allowed to attend. In the deep underground bunkers beneath the Pentagon, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Men and women who had lived in shadows for centuries finally stepped into the light. Colonel Ben Richards, commander of an organization that officially did not exist, spread classified files across the conference table. For 300 years, we have maintained the illusion that humanity is a minor military power, Richards said quietly. While the galaxy focused on our diplomats and traders, we have been preparing for exactly this situation. The files HFY War showed revealed the truth about human military capabilities. The civilian space stations scattered throughout human space were actually armed fortresses capable of destroying entire fleets. The scientific research facilities on Mars and Europa were weapons development centers that had produced technology decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen. Most shocking of all were the asteroid mining operations. What the galaxy thought were simple mining platforms were actually massive manufacturing complexes, producing warships and weapons in numbers that dwarfed the combined fleets of all three galactic powers. Admiral Morrison, attending the meeting, via secure hologram from his flagship, listened in amazement as the truth was revealed. "How long have we had these capabilities?" he asked. "Since about 50 years after first contact," Richards replied. "We learned early that the galaxy was a dangerous place. We decided that if we ever needed to defend ourselves or our allies, we would need weapons that no one expected us to have." Dr. Davis, now serving as the chief xenobiologist for the secret military programs, added her own analysis. "We've been studying all three powers for centuries. We know exactly how their ships work, how their weapons function, and most importantly, how they think. They believe their own propaganda about human weakness because we've encouraged them to believe it." President Foster looked around the room at faces she had never seen before, people who had spent their entire careers preparing for a war they hoped would never come. "How long would it take to mobilize our real military?" she asked. Colonel Richards checked his watch. "The Terra Defense Initiative has been on standby alert since the war began," he said. "We can have our first strike force ready to deploy in 6 hours. Full mobilization will take 72 hours. For a long moment, the room was silent. Foster thought about the children who had died at Kepler Station. She thought about the billions of civilians caught in a war that was spreading across the galaxy. She thought about 300 years of human restraint and peaceful coexistence. Finally, she spoke. "For 3 centuries, we've been the galaxy's peacekeepers because we chose to be, not because we had to be. We've used diplomacy instead of force because we believed in the power of words over weapons. But they've made that impossible now. They've..." Killed our children. She stood and looked each person in the room in the eye. They think we're weak because we've never shown them what we're really capable of. They've mistaken our choice to be peaceful for an inability to be anything else. That ends today. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would enter the Galactic War, but not in the way anyone expected. The quiet species was about to remind the galaxy-wide apex predators sometimes choose to remain silent. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in a briefing room he had never seen before, deep beneath the surface of Luna Station. The room was filled with technology that looked decades ahead of anything he had seen in the regular human fleet. Holographic displays showed detailed schematics of weapons and ships that seemed to come from science fiction. Colonel Ben Richards was explaining the true scope of human military capabilities, and Morrison felt his worldview shifting with every revelation. The 12 ships under his command were apparently just a small part of humanity's actual fleet. Hidden bases throughout human space housed thousands of vessels that the galaxy had never seen. Your flagship, the Liberty, is actually equipped with our latest stealth and defensive systems, Richards said, pointing to a schematic. What you thought were standard communication arrays are actually quantum field generators. Your ship could survive a direct hit from a Zephyrian planet killer beam. Morrison studied the technical readouts in amazement. But the performance specifications I was given were deliberately limited to maintain our cover story, Richards replied. Every human ship in the official fleet has capabilities far beyond what their crews know. We couldn't risk the truth getting out even to our own people. Dr. Helen Davis stepped forward with her own revelations. We've been studying the 3 galactic powers for centuries. We know everything about their technology, their tactics, and their weaknesses. The Zephyrians are powerful, but slow to adapt. The Hive Collective is coordinated but vulnerable to communication disruption. The Luminary Federation is advanced, but overconfident in their superiority. On the horizon, Captain Lisa Hayes was receiving her own shocking briefings via secure transmission from Earth Command. Her exploration vessel, which she had always thought was lightly armed for protection against pirates, was apparently one of the most advanced stealth ships in the galaxy. Captain Hayes, came the voice of Commander Steve Parker, whose existence had been classified until this moment. Your ship is equipped with sensors that can penetrate luminary phase cloaking. Your weapons can disrupt Hive communication networks across light years. Your engines can achieve speeds that would surprise everyone in the galaxy except us. Hayes stared at her instrument panels with new understanding. Systems she had thought were for scientific research were actually military-grade sensors and weapons. Her harmless exploration ship was apparently a cutting-edge reconnaissance vessel capable of taking on entire enemy fleets. President Foster was conducting her own briefings with military leaders who had remained hidden for centuries. The true scope of human military development was staggering. While the galaxy had been focused on the small, peaceful human fleet, Earth had been building a war machine that could challenge all 3 galactic powers combined. The Aurora Project has been our primary focus for the past century, explained General Patricia Wells, who officially did not exist in any government database. We've developed weapons that operate on principles the other species don't understand. Gravitational manipulation, quantum entanglement weapons, temporal displacement, fields reality anchors that can rewrite local physics. The weapons she described sounded impossible, but the demonstration videos were undeniable. Human scientists had achieved breakthroughs that put their technology decades ahead of the most advanced galactic civilizations. Lieutenant Tony Martinez, commanding the frigate Defiance, learned that his ship's mining laser was actually a focused gravity beam, capable of creating small black holes. His cargo containers were filled with weapons that could disable enemy ships without destroying them. The revelation continued throughout the human fleet. Every captain, every ship, every piece of equipment they thought they understood had hidden capabilities. The galaxy had been seeing exactly what humanity wanted them to see while the real military remained invisible. But the most shocking revelation came from the asteroid mining operations. What appeared to be simple industrial facilities were actually massive military production centers. For 3 centuries, they had been building ships and weapons in numbers that dwarfed anything in the known galaxy. Colonel Richards showed Morrison the production statistics, and the Admiral felt his knees go weak. We currently have over 50,000 combat vessels in various hidden facilities throughout human space. Another 20,000 are under construction. These numbers don't include our defensive installations, which number in the hundreds of thousands. The scale was unimaginable. The three galactic powers combined had perhaps 30,000 major warships. Humanity had been secretly building a fleet that outnumbered all of them while maintaining the fiction that they only had a dozen patrol ships. Dr. Davis explained the strategy behind the deception. We learned early that the galaxy was divided into competing powers that barely tolerated each other. We decided that the safest approach was to remain unnoticed while we developed the capability to defend ourselves and others if necessary. President Foster called for a final strategy meeting as reports continued to pour in about the escalating war. The three galactic powers were now engaged in total combat across dozens of star systems. Civilian casualties were climbing into the billions. Entire planets were being rendered uninhabitable. We have two choices, Foster said to the assembled military leaders. We can continue to hide while the galaxy tears itself apart, or we can intervene and stop this war. But if we intervene, there's no going back. The galaxy will know exactly what humanity is capable of. Admiral Morrison, still struggling to process everything he had learned, asked the question that was bothering him most. If we've had this capability for centuries, why didn't we use it to prevent conflicts before? We could have stopped wars, saved lives, maintained peace. Colonel Richards answered quietly. Because once you show that level of power, you become responsible for everything that happens afterward. The galaxy would expect us to be the police force for every conflict, the final judge of every dispute. We weren't ready for that responsibility. Dr. Davis nodded in agreement. We wanted to give other species the chance to evolve, to solve their own problems, to grow beyond their violent tendencies. We hoped that by setting a peaceful example, we could influence them to choose diplomacy over war. But they've made that impossible now, President Foster said grimly. They've killed our children. They're destroying entire civilizations. The time for hoping has passed. The meeting ended with a unanimous decision. Humanity would reveal its true military power to stop the galactic war. Admiral Morrison would lead the first strike force, but he would not be leading the small patrol fleet the galaxy expected. As Morrison prepared to return to his ship, Colonel Richards handed him a set of new command codes. These will unlock the real capabilities of your fleet and connect you to our hidden assets throughout the galaxy. Use them wisely, Admiral. After today, humanity will never be underestimated again. Morrison took the codes and felt the weight of 3 centuries of secrets in his hands. The quiet species was about to speak, and when they did, the galaxy would never be the same. Outside the briefing room, preparations were underway for the most significant military operation in human history. The hidden fleets were powering up their engines. The secret weapons were being charged. The galaxy's greatest predator was finally ready to show its fangs. The Andromeda sector had become a graveyard of twisted metal and burning plasma. For 6 weeks, the 3 galactic powers had been locked in the most devastating war the galaxy had ever seen. Thousands of ships from all 3 fleets drifted as lifeless hulks among the asteroids, their crews dead or dying in the cold vacuum of space. Admiral Kresh of the Zephyrian Empire stood on the bridge of his massive dreadnought, the scales of victory, watching the tactical display with growing frustration. His forces had taken heavy losses, but so had his enemies. The Hive Collective's swarm tactics had proven costly, and the Luminary Federation's quantum weapons were running low on power cores. The war had reached a stalemate, with all 3 powers bleeding ships and personnel at an unsustainable rate. But none of them could afford to be the first to back down. Their military honor and political survival depended on achieving victory, no matter the cost. That was when Admiral Jake Morrison's fleet arrived. The human ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the battle zone, and at first, none of the warring fleets paid them much attention. The same 12 ships that had been patrolling human space for years appeared on their sensors. To the battle-hardened commanders of the 3 great powers, they looked like gnats buzzing around giants. Admiral Kresh actually laughed when he received Morrison's transmission. The human admiral was demanding an immediate ceasefire and threatening to take action if hostilities continued. The reptilian commander activated his response channel, making sure all three fleets could hear his reply. Little mammals, you are far from home and out of your depth. Return to your safe systems and let real warriors finish their business. This is no place for species who play at being soldiers. The Hive Queen's response came through her translator drones, the artificial voice crackling with electronic static. Human vessels are too primitive to survive in this combat zone. Your weapons cannot penetrate our adaptive shielding. Withdraw before you are accidentally destroyed in the crossfire. The Luminary High Council was even more dismissive. Their message arrived as pure thought transmitted directly to Morrison's. Bridge. Your technology is centuries behind ours, humans. Your presence here is irrelevant to the outcome of this conflict. Depart while you still can. On the bridge of the Liberty, Morrison looked at his officers and smiled grimly. Well, gentlemen and ladies, I think we've been underestimated long enough. Communications open a channel to all ships in the combat zone. His voice carried across space to every vessel in the three fleets. This is Admiral Morrison of the Terran. Defense Force, you have 60 seconds to cease fire and power down your weapons. Any ship that fails to comply will be disabled. This is your only warning. The response was immediate and predictable. All three fleets opened fire on the human ships, confident that they could sweep aside this minor annoyance and return to their real war. Morrison gave the order that changed galactic history. All ships execute Protocol 7. Show them what humanity is really capable of. The transformation was instantaneous and shocking. The 12 human ships suddenly revealed their true nature as their disguised systems came online. Stealth fields that had been hiding additional vessels flickered and died, revealing that Morrison's small fleet actually consisted of over 200 ships. But the real shock came when the weapons started firing. The Liberty's main guns unleashed gravitational pulse beams that created miniature black holes along their path. A squadron of Zephyrian heavy cruisers simply vanished, their matter compressed beyond the event horizon of artificial singularities. Captain Lisa Hayes, commanding the horizon from her position at the edge of the battle, watched in awe as Lieutenant Tony Martinez's frigate Defiance engaged an entire hive swarm. The ship's mining laser revealed itself to be a focused gravity weapon that collapsed the molecular bonds of enemy hulls, causing their ships to simply fall apart at the atomic level. The Hive Collective tried to coordinate a response, but their efforts were disrupted by something they had never encountered before. Commander Steve Parker's reconnaissance ship unleashed a consciousness scrambler that severed the psychic links between the Hive ships, leaving thousands of vessels drifting aimlessly as their crews struggled to function as individuals for the first time in their lives. The Luminary Federation attempted to use their phase technology to become intangible, but they discovered that human ships were equipped with reality anchors. These devices locked local space-time into a fixed configuration, making it impossible for the energy beings to shift into their alternate dimensions. One by one, the weapons that had made the three galactic powers supreme revealed themselves to be useless against human technology. Zephyrian armor plating, thick enough to stop planet-killing beams, was penetrated effortlessly by quantum disruptors that phased the metal out of existence. Hive swarm tactics, which had overwhelmed countless enemies through sheer numbers, were neutralized by temporal displacement fields that trapped entire squadrons in time loops, causing them to repeat the same few seconds forever. Luminary quantum cannons, capable of striking targets in parallel dimensions, found their energy absorbed and redirected by human ships equipped with dimensional mirrors that turned enemy attacks back on themselves. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it ended, the combined fleets of three galactic superpowers lay helpless in space. Their ships were intact and their crews were alive, but every weapon system, every engine, every piece of military equipment had been permanently disabled by technology they could not understand. Admiral Kresh found himself staring at instruments that no longer responded to his commands. His massive dreadnought, which had been the terror of a dozen star systems, now drifted powerlessly while human ships moved around it like sharks, circling wounded prey. The Hive Queen discovered that her collective consciousness had been permanently altered. Her drones could still communicate with each other, but the neural networks that allowed them to function as weapons of war had been severed. They retained their intelligence and their unity, but they could no longer coordinate military attacks. The Luminary High Council realized that their quantum manipulation abilities had been restricted. They could still exist as energy beings and could still travel between dimensions, but whenever they tried to form weapons or military equipment, the devices simply refused to function. Commander Parker's voice echoed across all communication channels. "This is the Terran Defense Force. All hostilities will cease immediately. Any attempt to resume combat operations will result in the permanent removal of the offending vessels from this dimension. You have seen what we can do when we choose to act. Do not test our resolve further." For the first time in galactic history, 3 major military powers found themselves completely at the mercy of a species they had dismissed as primitives. The silence that followed Parker's announcement was not just the absence of weapons fire. It was the sound of an entire galaxy realizing that everything they thought they knew about humanity had been wrong. Admiral Morrison opened a final communication channel to the disabled fleets. "The war is over. Medical assistance will be provided to all injured personnel regardless of species. Transport ships will arrive within the hour to begin evacuating non-essential personnel. The Terran Defense Force is now assuming responsibility for maintaining peace in this sector." In 17 minutes, humanity had transformed from a minor species to the ultimate authority in galactic affairs. The age of competing military powers had ended. The age of enforced peace had begun. The aftermath of the 17-minute battle sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy that would be felt for generations. Within hours of the engagement, every major power was frantically reassessing their intelligence on humanity, while emergency sessions convened on 1,000 different worlds. On the bridge of the Liberty, Admiral Jake Morrison watched as human medical ships moved among the disabled alien fleets, providing aid to the wounded without regard for species or allegiance. It was a sight that perfectly captured the contradiction that was humanity, devastating in war but compassionate in victory. Dr. Helen Davis had arrived from Earth aboard one of the medical vessels, and she now stood beside Morrison as they observed the rescue operations. "The psychological impact of this battle will be more significant than the military outcome," she said quietly. "Every species in the galaxy is now asking the same question. What else don't we know about humans?" The answer to that question was becoming clear as human capabilities continued to be revealed. The asteroid mining operations throughout human space were acknowledged to be massive military manufacturing centers. The scientific research stations were unveiled as advanced weapons development facilities. Even the peaceful trading posts had hidden defensive systems capable of protecting entire star systems. Captain Lisa Hayes, now promoted to admiral and placed in command of the newly formed Exploration and Intelligence Division, was leading the effort to establish communication with neutral species throughout the galaxy. Her ship, the Horizon, had become the flagship for humanity's diplomatic outreach program. "The smaller species are terrified," she reported to Morrison during their daily briefing. "They're not sure if we're liberators or conquerors. Some are asking for our protection. Others are trying to surrender to us preemptively." Morrison understood their fear. For 3 centuries, the galaxy had operated under the assumption that military power belonged to the 3 great civilizations. Smaller species had been forced to choose sides or risk being conquered. Now, suddenly, there was a 4th power that had proven itself superior to all others combined. President Amanda Foster addressed the galaxy in a historic broadcast that would be remembered as the moment everything changed. Standing in the rebuilt Galactic Council chambers on Earth, she spoke directly to every species in known space. "For 300 years, humanity has chosen the path of peace because we believed in the power of cooperation over conflict. We developed our defensive capabilities not for conquest, but as insurance against exactly the kind of war we just witnessed. We did not reveal our strength because we hoped we would never need to use it." She paused, looking directly into the camera that carried her words to billions of beings across the galaxy. The attack on Kepler Station and the deaths of innocent civilians, including our children, made continued restraint impossible. We intervened not to establish dominance, but to prevent the complete destruction of galactic civilization. The president's words were carefully chosen, but their meaning was unmistakable. Humanity had the power to dominate the galaxy if they chose to, but they were offering partnership instead of subjugation. The response from the three former military powers was swift and pragmatic. Admiral Kresh, speaking for the Zephyrian Empire, was the first to formally request negotiations. His words were broadcast throughout Zephyrian space, marking the first time in their history that the proud reptilian warriors had acknowledged military defeat. The humans have demonstrated capabilities we did not know existed, Kresh admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of his people's new reality. The Zephyrian Empire formally requests to enter into peaceful relations with the Terran Defense Force. We acknowledge human authority in matters of galactic security. The Hive Queen's response came through her translator drones, but the artificial voice carried a new tone of respect. The collective consciousness has been modified by human intervention. We find that we can no longer coordinate aggressive military actions against other species. We accept this change and request guidance in adapting to our new existence. The Luminari High Council's message was the most complex, transmitted as pure thought that carried emotional undertones their species rarely shared with others. We underestimated the humans catastrophically. Their technology operates on principles we do not understand. We formally request to study under human guidance and contribute our knowledge to the greater peace. Colonel Ben Richards, now revealed as the head of the Terran Defense Initiative, established the new galactic security framework. The three former military powers were not conquered or humiliated, but rather integrated into a new system where their strengths could be used constructively. The Zephyrians, with their natural warrior culture, became the backbone of the new galactic peacekeeping force. Their massive ships were retrofitted with human technology that prevented them from being used for aggressive warfare while maintaining their effectiveness for defense and rescue operations. The Hive Collective, with their unparalleled coordination abilities, took on the role of galactic logistics and disaster response. Their ability to work as one mind made them perfect for managing the complex supply chains needed to rebuild the war-torn regions of space. The Luminary Federation, with their advanced energy manipulation capabilities, became the scientific research arm of the new galactic government. Their quantum manipulation abilities, when combined with human reality anchor technology, opened up possibilities for peaceful applications neither species had imagined alone. Lieutenant Tony Martinez, now Captain Martinez, found himself commanding one of the new integrated peacekeeping vessels. His crew included Zephyrian security officers, Hive logistics specialists, and Luminary science officers, all working together under human command. It's amazing how well they work together when they're not trying to kill each other, he reported to Admiral Morrison. The Zephyrians respect strength, and they recognize that we're stronger than they are. The Hive members seem almost relieved to be working toward construction instead of destruction. The Luminari are fascinated by our technology and eager to learn. Dr. Davis, now serving as the Director of Xenological Relations, oversaw the integration process. Her decades of studying alien psychology had prepared her for the challenge of helping former enemies become allies. The key was never defeating them militarily, she explained to President Foster during one of their regular briefings. It was demonstrating that we had the power to destroy them but chose not to. That choice earned their respect in a way that conquest never could have. The transformation of galactic politics was dramatic and swift. The Galactic Council, once dominated by the three military powers, became a forum for genuine cooperation under human guidance. Smaller species that had lived in fear for centuries suddenly found themselves with rights and protections they had never imagined. Commander Steve Parker, now in charge of the Galactic Intelligence Service, reported that conflict between species had dropped by over 90% within the first year after the battle. The knowledge that humanity is watching and willing to intervene has eliminated most causes of interspecies war, he noted. Species that might have fought for resources now negotiate instead, knowing that violence will bring swift human intervention. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed the concept of strength itself. For millennia, power had been measured in the size of fleets and the destructiveness of weapons. Humanity had proven that true power lay in having overwhelming force and choosing not to use it unless absolutely necessary. Admiral Morrison, now Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Force, established his headquarters on a space station, at the exact location where the 17-minute battle had taken place. The station, named New Kepler in honor of the civilians who had died, became a symbol of humanity's commitment to protecting the innocent. On the anniversary of the battle, Morrison stood on the observation deck of New Kepler Station, watching, as ships from dozens of species traveled peacefully through space that had once been a battlefield. His own granddaughter, just 5 years old, stood beside him, pointing excitedly at the colorful alien vessels. "Grandpa, why are all those different ships flying together?" she asked. Morrison smiled and picked her up, thinking about how to explain the events that had reshaped the galaxy. "Because sometimes, little one, the strongest thing you can do is teach others that they don't need to fight. We showed them that peace is more powerful than war." The child nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense to her young mind. To her generation of humans, a galaxy at peace was the natural order of things. They would grow up never knowing the fear and violence that had once dominated galactic civilization. The galaxy had indeed fallen silent, but not from fear or defeat. It had fallen silent because, for the first time in its history, there was nothing left to fight about. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through force of arms, but through the simple demonstration that they possessed ultimate force, and chose not to use it except to protect the innocent. The age of galactic warfare was over. The age of enforced peace had begun. And at the center of it all, the quiet species finally revealed why they had chosen to remain silent for so long. Sometimes, the most